My name is Fabio Pitta. I'm a visiting scholar here at the History Department at Harvard University and also coordinator of projects in the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights. I will moderate this event. This event called Stop Land Grabs, Financialization of Farmland, Rights of Rural Communities and University Endowments and Academic Retirements. Is held also by the History Department and the workshop Slavery in its Afterlives, and it's the continuity of other events we've been organizing here at the university about endowment and pension funds, investments in agribusiness and farmland, and its impact and consequences around the world. Today we have with us Devlin Kuyek from Grain, Maria Luisa Mendonça, also Pastoral for Social Justice and Human Rights. We have Altamiran Ribeiro from Pastoral Land Commission, Piauí, Brazil. We will stream a video from him. And Tristan Thibodeau from ActionAid, and later Carle from Stop Land Grabs, and the head of the History Department, Professor Sidney Chalhoub, that will talk a little bit also about Harvard investments and campaigns with these funds and the consequences of their investments. So we will begin with Devlin Kuyek. Please, you have the floor. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Fabio. So we have
To the right.
Okay. So we have a long list of speakers and a lot to get through. We want to leave time for questions and answers, so I'm going to be fairly quick. But I've been asked to give a bit of the background context of Harvard's move into acquiring farmland, and then some thoughts about where things are currently. So just to start, Harvard began buying farmland after the food and financial crisis of 2007, 2008. And this was part of a larger trend, a larger sort of wave of land grabbing that emerged at that time, where companies were sort of scouring the planet, looking for places to acquire large areas of farmland and to produce agricultural commodities for export. In about 8 years, we at Grain were able to identify nearly 500 such large-scale land deals. I mean, we're talking, over 10,000 hectares type land deals, involving approximately 30 million hectares of land in 78 countries, so spread out across the planet. Looking back now, and with being able to assess what's happened from that time, you can see that many of these land deals, didn't even advance to the state of production. A lot of them were failures. Some of them had intentions of increasing food security, but most of the crops that were being produced were for vegetable oils like palm oil and soybeans. Maize or corn is another one of the few commodity crops that were produced. And they resulted in numerous negative impacts on local communities. So there are very few benefits, if any, for local communities, but a lot of consequences. And a lot of displacement, land grabbing that happened. And there's a legacy now of land conflicts from these land deals that communities are dealing with, including those who are affected by Harvard's land deals. One of the main drivers that led to this rush for farmland was the financial crisis, 2008. And institutional investors, whether endowments or pension funds, started looking to farmland as a kind of new asset class that they could put their money into to deal with the volatility and the collapse of traditional investments in, say, stocks and bonds. And this, I think it's important to say, if we're thinking about the endowment, that this pool of money is really a product of some deliberate choices. And it comes from the US, from Canada, from a few European and Asian countries where the retirement systems have been privatized and financialized, and the education systems as well. So, you know, Harvard has a $50 billion endowment because in the US you have a private system of education. To a lesser extent, it comes from family offices of wealthy billionaires, and also from sovereign wealth fund, which is mainly a product of fossil fuel extraction. And over the last decade, much of this money has been increasingly channeled towards what they call alternative investments. Well, farmland would be one of them, timberland would be another, but you get a whole range of other sectors that this money is going into. Nursing homes is a big one, is the privatized nursing care in the US now. All kinds of infrastructure, so privatized highways or toll roads, can be water utilities, can be renewable energy grids, can be investments in prisons. I mean, really, it's going everywhere, and it's going there through what are called private equity funds. You probably all have heard something, a little bit of private equity funds. These are very opaque structures. They don't operate on the stock exchange. They operate in what they call private markets. So you have very little information about them. They tend to operate through offshore structures. And the managers who manage these funds charge exorbitant fees. And they have a very short time horizon in terms of investment. So Harvard, for instance, the endowment would put money into a private equity fund and expect to take it back out with, you know, huge returns in 10 to 15 years. So their investments, whether it's in agriculture or in healthcare, have this kind of short horizon, and that informs the way that they operate. Harvard is really almost, I would say, an exaggerated case of this tendency. Looking at the latest report, they say that almost 40% of the endowment is now invested in private equity funds. Typically, it's around 10% for pension funds. So it's amongst institutional investors, it has a very high allocation to private equity. I mean, only 11% of the endowment is now invested in stocks. When it comes to Harvard's farmland investments, they had created a natural resources department, so they were investing directly in farmland. They were the ones going out, creating their structures, buying up farmland in different places. And by 2017, through this strategy, they had devoted 13% of the endowment to natural resources, which is essentially farmland and timberland. And when it came to farmland, they had acquired, you can see on the map here, in different parts of the world, about 850,000 hectares of land. A lot of this was in Brazil, and you'll hear more about that. Now, after pressure from groups like Harvard Land Grabs and others, and various scandals around these decisions, they have pursued a strategy to reduce their holdings, or at least their direct holdings in farmland. So today, only 1% of Harvard's endowment is invested in what they call natural resources, again, which is mainly farmland and timberland. But there's a big but to that. It's not clear how much is going through private equity funds now, so indirectly, and they don't talk about this. When Harvard, as part of their strategy, sort of to pull back a bit from natural resource, one thing they did was that whole natural resource division was spun off into an independent private equity firm, which exists just down the road here. And they allocated a big chunk of their assets, including a big portion of their farmland holdings in Brazil, to this new entity called Solemn Partners. So a lot of even the staff that worked at the natural resource division has shifted over to this area. And Harvard has put a lot of money into this private equity fund, and pays a lot of money to this private equity fund now in fees. And Solemn, like other private equity players and pension funds, including Canadian pension funds, have been shifting their strategy somewhat. So they sold off the division that was invested in the large-scale farmland holdings in Brazil. And they've moved more towards the production of high-value crops like nuts, avocados, blueberries, where you produce it on a smaller scale. But the key is to get access to water, because these crops are water thirsty. So you're essentially converting that access to water to these high-value crops that you're exporting, and that's how you're making your money. But the thing to understand about this, and it's not just Harvard, it's other big players that are doing this, is those small scale land grabs, because of their huge dependence on water, can have similar impacts, can have similar scale of impacts. And we are seeing in many places around the world, particularly, it's ironic, but particularly in places where there is a depletion of water, where there's a water crisis, like in parts of Chile, where you've had these industries for some time, or even when there can be new industries, but they're targeting these areas where they can get access to water rights, pump that water out as fast as possible, and convert that into money through the production of these high-value, water-thirsty crops, and then have an exit 10, 15, 20 years later. So there's really no emphasis on sustainability. It's more about making as much money as you can as quickly as possible. Some of the countries that are targeted include Chile, Mexico, Morocco, Peru, Spain, and parts of the US as well. Just very quickly, I won't get into the details about this, but I circled in red some of the financial companies that Harvard is connected with who are pursuing the strategy. So of course you have Solon Partners, but you also have the Renewable Resources Group, which is again a very sort of opaque entity, but that has been on a real big spending spree, buying into especially into the fruit production industry. And they have a history of working with Harvard to acquire water rights in parts of the southern and southwestern US. And then Nuveen I circled there as well, because many faculty and workers at Harvard have their retirements managed by Nuveen or TIAA, and TIAA is another player pursuing this strategy. You have conflicts emerging in various places. Just a few examples here in the Cuyuma Valley in California, where there's these huge carrot growing companies, Bolt House Farms and Gribway Farms. These companies are owned by private equity funds. And that includes CIAA, it includes California public pension system. And they're pursuing an aggressive strategy to use the courts even to acquire water rights, take those away from local communities who've now launched a boycott effort around it. In Arizona, you had a scandalous case of lands with access to aquifers where the water is being depleted, where people now are, in emergency situations in terms of access to water. And those lands have been rented out to companies from the Gulf region who are producing feed crops for export. And there's a structure that involves the state pension system through a private equity fund that actually acquired those lands as a speculative purpose to then rent them out to these agribusiness companies. In Jalisco in Mexico, where I recently was, you could see evidence of this, the disaster that this kind of model is creating. And there's a major water crisis, water conflicts are breaking out. And again, you have some of the companies linked to Harvard who are operating in these areas to produce things like blueberries and export those to supermarkets in North America. And just finally, one other trend, just to signal as something important, I think, for keep in mind when it comes to tracking what Harvard might be up to. There is a trend now, a very worrying one, where companies are trying to acquire large areas of land, particularly in the global south, for tree plantations and even for the growing of particular agricultural crops to generate carbon credits. That's the objective. It can also be integrated into some of the land grabs, so it's kind of another revenue stream, something called carbon farming, where they say they're gonna, adopt a few methods that might generate or might sink carbon into the soil, and that creates more incentive for these companies to invest, and it becomes a bit of a green investment that fits into their ESG portfolios now to purchase farmland. So particularly if we're thinking about divest campaigns and stuff around Harvard, it's really important to keep that in mind, that some of the ways in which that can get diverted can be equally problematic when it comes to the climate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Deb. Thank you very much. So please, Maria Luisa Mendonça from Network for Social Justice and Human Rights. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the organizers of this event. We have been building this coalition to pressure Harvard and TAA. There are main players in this process of expanding land grabbing and the agribusiness model of monocropping plantations around the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in Brazil and how we have been building solidarity between working directly with affected communities in Brazil and the international coalition in the US, Europe, Canada. So it's very important to have this event so we can increase our outreach, public education, and our movement building here at Harvard as well. So because it's that is a really key role that Harvard professors and students and alumni have been playing in this movement. So we started to identify this process of financial speculation on farmland after the 2008 global economic crisis, after the collapse of the housing market in the US. Financial corporations started to migrate to target farmland around the world and in the US as well. And we identified this process because we were looking at the impact of expanding monocropping of sugarcane plantations for the production of ethanol that was sold as green energy, but had huge environmental impacts because of the expansion of sugarcane plantations. And at that time, also several oil companies started to partner with sugarcane corporations to control the ethanol market around the world. So we were looking at the merger of Cosan, which is the largest sugarcane corporation in Brazil, with Shell, the Dutch oil company Shell. And with that merger, we identified that they created a subsidiary that was a new type of company in Brazil, a type of rural real estate corporation called Rede. And Rede had the role of connecting large corporations, financial corporations, with the Brazilian farmland market. And then we identified that the main source of funding for Rede was TAA, a US-based pension fund that also receives funds from European and Canadian pension funds. And together with Harvard University, TAA and Harvard are key players that are promoting this process of financial speculation and control over farmland around the world. So even before we started to work directly with impacted communities, which we have been doing for several years now, we knew two things. We knew that when large corporations, such as the Harvard Corporation and TAA, create funds to buy farmland around the world. And even if they say, even if we identify, even if it's 1% of the portfolio, it's still huge. For the communities on the ground, it doesn't matter if it's 1%. They have been impacted by this process, because this is one of their excuses. Oh, it's just 1%. But for people on the ground, it's their livelihoods that have been impacted. So when they create these large funds to buy farmland around the world, just by doing that, it creates pressure on rural communities. So local land grabbers start to operate with violence to displace communities, indigenous communities, in the case of Brazil, the Afro-Brazilian rural communities, the quilombolas, the peasant communities, and also in other countries, including the US, a risk for small farmers to lose the right to land. And also, although their main goal is control over land, in order to justify that, they promote the expansion of monocropping plantations that, although these corporations release sustainability reports, we know that a large monocropping plantation cannot be sustainable because it depends on large amounts of chemical inputs based on fossil fuels and also large irrigation systems. So that is the water grabbing connected to the land grabbing as well. And the main region where they operate in Brazil is the Brazilian Cerrado, which is the most diverse savanna in the world in terms of biodiversity. It's a key source of underground water and river springs in Brazil. The trees are relatively small, but their roots go on and on and on for several kilometers. So it's a key region of the country in terms of underground water sources, and it also regulates the rain cycles between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, South America and North America. So it has a huge impact. The deforestation in the Cerrado has a huge impact in the whole hemisphere. And what happens then is that these corporations, they promote the idea that there is this huge amount of just empty land in Brazil, but those there are thousands and thousands of local communities that have been living in the region, for hundreds of years, indigenous communities, quilombola and peasant communities, and so the impact is, that is a huge impact on their livelihoods, and with violence, deforestation, and also that also represents a risk for, in the case of TAA clients that have their retirement funds managed by TAA, and also for the Harvard community, because after a few years, the soil is destroyed, the water sources are destroyed, the biodiversity is destroyed, so the land it's basically loses the productivity, and that also represents a risk for clients that they sell this idea that farmland is a secure investment, but after a few years with the destruction of the land, the tendency is that the price of the land starts to decrease. So we have been organizing and using different strategies. We support communities in legal defense, doing legal defense to advance collective land rights. We have been doing, lots of research and building knowledge and monitoring the situation. We have produced several reports and articles in English and in Portuguese, so you can look for that information. And again, building international solidarity to support communities, affected communities around the world. And so we're going to have other speakers talking more specifically about what it's possible to do, how you can get involved with this movement here at Harvard. And so this is our coalition. You can also look for more information, and these are some of the organizations that have been involved. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Luisa, for your words. And now we will have Altamiran Ribeiro. He's an activist that lives in the state of Piauí in Brazil. He works with affected communities in an area where Harvard and TIA they have or had investments around there. And we are streaming video footage from him. So please.
Situações, problemas sociais e ambientais por causa dos investimentos que vão dos Estados Unidos para o Brasil, para essas empresas. Essa quantidade de terras que está sendo comprada mostra isso, comprova essa questão, não é? Que apenas interesse no lucro para comprar terras, e são terras que a gente chama terras roubadas, não é? Terras griladas. Os trabalhadores não têm um recurso, não têm dinheiro para poder pagar advogados, para chegar até a capital a tempo hábil para resolver as situações. Então termina sendo presas fáceis. Eu vejo de cara duas possibilidades. A primeira delas é a perca das terras das pessoas para espaço desses investimentos que chegam. Uma outra similaridade que eu vejo entre o Piauí e Mississippi é a forma de resistência que as pessoas buscam. Eles se organizam, né, ou em cooperativas ou em coletivos, para resistir, para dizer que são parte da história, para dizer que pertence àquele local. Para mim é triste, é preocupante, né, de ver o tanto que é a ganância do homem. É garantir futuros destruindo outros futuros. A tendência é se avançar, se nada for feito. Esses investimentos de compra de terras lá no Piauí, bem como aqui também, tem que ser colocado um ponto final. O remédio é a unidade. A ação coletiva pode ajudar a todos nós chegar lá. Você pode conversar com seus governos. Você pode fazer muitas coisas. Só não fique quieto, porque você só não fique parado achando que tudo está bem.
So thank you. And now we have Quinn-Thibodeau from ActionAid, another NGO part of the campaign, international campaign against the impacts of such investments in agribusiness and farmland. Please, Tristan.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Let me see.
It's not changing?
It's not changing. There we go. Here we go. There's my slide. So I'm going to talk about the strategy to make change, to stop these kinds of investments, to stop the development, the further development of this industry. And I'm going to be specifically talking about the things that we've done and learned in this campaign and in our coalition. So here's the video that I embedded just in case it didn't work. This is actually our new logo, and again, it's the same organizations that were mentioned in Maria Luisa's slide. But what I'm going to say is that we're a campaign of international development, environmental, human rights, social justice, and faith-based NGOs, but also grassroots farmer organizations. And though we're primarily based in the US and do work in the US, there are also organizations from Brazil, from Canada, and Europe that are part of this work. Our organizations, though, all have a shared understanding that the way the rural economy is all over the world is unsustainable and needs to be dramatically transformed towards food sovereignty and agroecology. And that this must begin with ensuring that the people and communities who produce food have access to and control over land and resources. So that is captured in our campaign goal. So we have 5 campaign strategies. But I guess I should first say that our goal is not just to, actually, I skipped. Here, back to the goal. Our campaign goal is to try and stop this new and developing sector of the financial industry, the financialization of farmland, timberland, other rural lands. We're not trying to make corporate farmland speculation better, more responsible, or more sustainable. And we actually don't see that as being even possible. Farmers in rural communities do not want this financial model in their communities. Workers who have their retirements with TIAA, or students who have their tuitions funding this endowment at Harvard or other universities, that's not what they had in mind for how to fund education. And so we're trying to stop this industry altogether before it gets too big. I would just say that most corporate campaigns don't attempt to go this far. Therefore, what we're aiming to do is to build a movement, and that video captures this sentiment. So we're organizing and mobilizing the people directly involved, the communities and people whose savings and whose tuition are being misused, and also the communities directly affected, in order to put pressure on the companies that are the highest profile and most influential in the industry. And as we build awareness of this problem, we are doing what we can to educate policymakers as they develop new laws, new regulations to address the situation, while also trying to amplify the solutions that are coming out of communities that are the kind of transformation that we need. So what does this look like? We have 5 strategies. We've heard about TIAA and Harvard. These are 2 of the biggest. They're also 2 of the most recognizable. I mean, everyone knows the Harvard brand. Many people know the TIAA brand. And they're also very active in making the financialization of rural lands possible. They're always sponsoring conferences and trying to facilitate more money going into these sectors. TIAA manages the retirements primarily of workers at colleges and universities. So that means that we find ourselves primarily organizing students, faculty, and staff as we in this campaign and in this work. We also let people know about this problem through investigative research that we do with communities on the ground. And it's a key part of this because, as has been kind of mentioned, this stuff is so opaque. And some of these, especially in Brazil, where this is happening, it's so far away. Altamiran talked about it. You know, the lands are so far from where people can see what's happening. So this research is so important. And then with this research, it's picked up by the media, it gains attention. It gives us the ability to talk to policymakers and say, this is an issue that you're not paying attention to. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we work with Raise Up, amplify the voices of communities to both communicate how serious these problems are, but also to amplify their solutions. And finally, we're connecting these issues to some of the bigger issues, like climate justice. How do we get the whole financial sector out of fossil fuels? And how do we protect forests? Because to really build a movement, we need to connect these things. And also these other movements are seeing that, oh, just getting, some of these financial companies, just getting TIA to divest from Exxon is not going to solve the problem. It needs to be a whole transformation of the sector. Let's see, next slide. These are some key moments for the campaign over the last 6 years. Campaign started with we launched a petition with 100,000 signatures, and it developed further when we brought Altamiran from the video to the United States. He met with policymakers in DC, came here to Harvard, spoke to students, spoke to faculty, and then went to Mississippi, as you saw, to meet with Black farmers and to build this international solidarity. We worked with faculty and staff at University of Wisconsin and University of Iowa. These were very significant sort of fights for us for various reasons. One of the TIAA governors was the chancellor of the Wisconsin system, and University of Iowa is one of the centers of agribusiness, and they actually brought TIAA's main farmland business director to speak in favor of their business, and the faculty at University of Iowa overwhelmingly voted to pass this resolution sort of condemning TIAA for this farmland business and telling them that they didn't want their retirements in there. And then we organized this big letter, over 110 organizations, and I think it's, for our understanding, the first time that fossil fuel divestment, agribusiness divestment, and industrial forest divestment was brought together, targeting a company around its climate policy. One thing we found is that TIAA in particular has, most of the financial sector really do not have an understanding of the climate crisis, how serious it is, and how urgent it is to take action. And then this year, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey introduced new legislation that would ban corporations from owning rural land, both farmland and timberland, and would make them ineligible for any taxpayer-funded programs or subsidies if they decide to hold on to that land, which would frankly be a game changer. Just getting things away wouldn't be a solution or a silver bullet, but it would be it's an important thing to advance the political conversation around this issue. And then lastly, there was recently a new report from Hedgie Social. I'm not sure if it's up there. I don't think it is. That is, frankly, we haven't needs more attention, that shows that TIAA in particular knowingly and willingly either committed fraud or was dealing with buying land that they thought would be was illegally owned, which I think is a huge contribution or a huge accomplishment. This is an example of some of the reports that I was talking about. Report here, and then coverage in Bloomberg. This is an example of a academic organizing toolkit we put together, faculty senate resolutions, staff senate resolutions, union resolutions, student organization statements, student senates. We haven't really done much of that, but these resolutions are all very important for kind of building a cascading effort and showing that there's broad opposition. So we've got 5 steps to get a resolution. This is some pictures from the actions at Harvard. This is Altamiran when he came to Harvard in 2018, I guess. And lastly, I'm just going to close with some learnings from the campaign. The first is that the average worker, academic worker does not like the financialization of farmland, does not want a financial company to be buying the land, to be turning the farmers back into tenants, to be amassing big plantations. it's not what they imagine agriculture to be, it's not what they think it should be, and it's not what they think their retirements are going to, their retirement savings are going to. So that's been a big learning for us to see that. And also just to see how bad a situation retirements and pensions actually are, where there's some decent people that are running public pension systems, but they need to generate return to pay their ever increasing, base of workers. And the public sector is not contributing money, so they're relying on more and more of these speculative investments, these privatized investments that they are not even being told are, they read the reports and they say, oh, this is green, this is responsible, this is sustainable, let's do this. They don't see, they're not getting this information that we have, that they're actually a huge problem. The second one is that the financial companies, namely TIA, which is one I've spent more time dealing with, they are spending much more time on their PR and trying to produce beautiful reports and then actually responding to the problems that we're bringing to them, which they know fully well about, which is a sign that we can't trust these companies to regulate themselves or to govern themselves, which is often the assumption that a lot of corporate campaigns have, trying to change private policy, a company's private policy, but we don't see that as really being viable in this case. The second one is that it shows just how important the image is, not only of individual companies, but also of the financial sector at large. If they don't have an image of wisdom, of knowing best, of being really real, not idealistic, but grounded in the realities, then their power kind of disappears. And I think in this case, it's very clear where, they're not, they have projections, but the farmland that they're buying may become completely unviable as the climate crisis intensifies in the 10-15 years where they plan on selling it. The third point is that many people in the United States still don't understand the reality of what happens in rural areas and how destructive the agribusiness model is. And especially, I'm actually learning the industrial timber model. I thought clear cutting was kind of phased out after the Lorax, but I was just in Oregon and saw, I didn't actually get to go to TIA's timberland out there, but saw images, colleagues were taking drones over the land and they're just clear cutting everything. And their reports say, oh, we're committed to biodiversity, we are committed to sustainability, we're sequestering carbon, but the reality is completely different. And this campaign, this effort has an opportunity to communicate what's really happening in rural areas, because rural areas everywhere, but particularly in the United States, there's so much pain and so much suffering and so much devastation. Finally, the last thing is that this issue is incredibly bipartisan at the grassroots level. Right-wing people, left-wing people do not want wealthy individuals, out-of-state financial companies coming in and owning the land, dictating what has to take place on it. And that is a huge opportunity for us because, we're always trying to find common ground, right? It's incredibly polarized political situation. And this is an issue where we can actually make progress and deliver for people and for communities and the environment. I'm done.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to invite Rachel Carle from Stop Harvard Land Grabs to tell us a little bit how they engage to try to avoid this investments around here at Harvard University.
Great.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks so much. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here. I'm going to talk just a little bit about what campus organizing has looked like as part of this broader strategy that Tristan just laid out. So first, I'll say a little bit about why campus organizing. So we are a group, Stop Harvard Land Grabs is a group of primarily Harvard students, alumni, faculty, and staff, people with an affiliation with Harvard. And so we have a stake in this issue because Harvard is causing harm across the country and around the world in our name and with money that is ostensibly for our benefit. But we know it's not benefiting us. So we deserve to know what Harvard is doing, how it's using its money. We deserve to have a voice and have a sense of democracy in the governance of this institution. And we have a responsibility to speak out when Harvard is causing harm with our money and in our name. So this photo is from earlier this year. This is a hearing in Santa Barbara County, California. And it's one example of how using our role and identity as Harvard affiliates can be useful to the broader movement. So local farmers in the Cuyama Valley were organizing against Harvard's attempted water grab. Harvard has vineyards in California. And they were applying for a very water-intensive reservoir in an already critically overdrafted basin. So local farmers organized for essentially 7 years to stop this project, and it came to the local government. And Harvard students, alumni, and staff were able to offer testimony alongside local farmers to be able to say that we don't agree with the decision that Harvard is making and how to manage this investment, and to speak to the broader global pattern that has just been articulated so well today, that we know Harvard is not a responsible manager. We know they are not a good neighbor. And we can understand this particular local investment in a broader context and help tell that story alongside communities who are directly impacted. Oh, and to say they lost. So Harvard's permit was denied, which means at the very least it's a stoppage, right? Like they cannot appeal for another year. It means it's very costly for them to continue, and we'll see what happens next. But in a sense, it's an overlap of both advocacy and direct action in a way. So there have been several waves of student organizing over the years. And this most recent wave that we're calling Stop Harvard Land Grabs came out of really the incredible work of everyone here in the Stop Land Grabs Coalition, of years of strong research and raising the alarms and coming to Harvard and provoking students to be more active in understanding this issue and raising our voices. So from all of that work, there was a need for a container for Harvard affiliates to be able to organize among ourselves and to hold down kind of what it means to be on campus and to be Harvard affiliates. So that has led to the development of these 4 demands that are in alignment with other pieces of the movement. Transparency. We don't even know, as Devlin said, in a lot of ways, what Harvard is doing with its endowment. The return of land, reparations for communities that have been impacted, and no new farmland. Not just for the Harvard endowment, but understanding that Harvard sets an example across the country and around the world for investment practices, and hoping that we can condemn this whole system and shift it to something that looks a little more like responsible investment in communities. Or maybe just no endowment, up to you all. Just to highlight a few pieces of recent work through Stop Harvard Land Grabs, they fall mostly into these 3 buckets. So the first around action and advocacy. I mentioned the California hearing earlier this year as one piece of that. That screenshot on the left there is our petition. We've had over 700 people so far sign on to those 4 demands I just mentioned. Many of them are Harvard affiliates. Others are also just members of the Cambridge and Boston community or across the country, and some directly impacted communities as well. If folks are part of an organization or part of a student group, you can also sign on as an organization to these demands. On the right, there is a photo of us attempting to deliver that petition and the signatures to the president of Harvard's office. They locked the doors. So we were able to have a protest. That sign says Harvard profits from displacement. And we were able to connect with organizers fighting Harvard's gentrification of Alston Brighton and connect that with this like global endowment land grabs scheme. So the petition is still live because it has not landed in in the president's hands. So we'll share a link in just a moment. If you haven't signed the petition yet, please do. That's our main way to know how many people are interested and to continue communications. Other pieces around public education and research and media. These are two screenshots over the course of the pandemic. We had unique opportunities for transnational work, right? To engage with folks on the right there. That's Altamiran, who we just heard from via video, as well as two organizers from Argentina in a webinar about Harvard's land grabs. And on the left is a more recent webinar around what Lula's presidency means for land justice in Brazil. So some opportunities to ensure that as many students as possible who come through Harvard are exposed to what this means, and beyond just engaging with the campaign, develop a broader politic and understanding of internationalism that hopefully will influence wherever life takes them after Harvard. We've also had a lot of good media opportunities to continue developing that narrative as a coalition and as students finding your voices, as op-eds and coordinating with media to ensure that there's proper coverage and accountability whenever Harvard makes bad decisions, which it does a lot. The last thing I'll flag is that on our website, we have a research library that lists, we think, every article that's ever been written about Harvard's land grabs. And we hope that can be a resource to everyone who's autonomously doing this work and can tell the story together. The last piece I'll mention is around movement and coalition building. We absolutely don't do this work alone. These photos highlight two moments. On the bottom left there is from an endowment justice forum and action that was organized by several divestment groups. There's a lot of movement across Harvard to end Harvard's investment in fossil fuels in the prison industrial complex and occupation of Palestine. We know these are all pieces of the same story about what it means for Harvard to have this incredible amount of money and to be using it to cause harm and express power. On the right there is also a banner drop at the Harvard-Yale game last year. Undergraduates led a real deep dive into Harvard's investments and highlighting several cases across all of those issues, including land grabs, and then really brought that to everyone's attention in a powerful way at the Harvard-Yale game. So alongside the important work of all of the groups gathered today in the Stop Land Grabs Coalition, we also are so proud to work with many student groups and to think creatively as we continue this work about what it looks like to have a broad picture of justice at this university. Just a couple ways to engage. That QR code is the petition I just mentioned. So if you haven't signed it, it takes 5 seconds, a nice moment to do so right now. As I said, you can sign as an individual or as an organization. And happy to think of other ways to partner and to really name all of our strengths in this room, all of our resources in this room, and ensure that we're in formation in a way that makes our movement as powerful as possible. And lastly, especially for folks who are Harvard affiliates here today, please do join us. If you're a Harvard student, alum, staff, faculty, there is a place for you and a core organizing team that we are thrilled to be growing this semester. So if you haven't signed in today, I think there's a sign-in form going around. There's a place for you to check a box to say that you're interested in organizing with us. Or feel free to come up to me or Hannah if you want to raise your hand, or Kayla if you want to raise your hand, and we're happy to talk more about Harvard land grabs.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Now I'd like to invite Professor Sidney Chalhoub to join us. The professor is the head of the history department here and will that was a little bit how it is possible to engage with the highest levels of Harvard University to try to change their practices. Please, Professor.
So thank you. So I'm Sidney Chalhoub. I'm historian of Brazil, and labor and slavery in Brazil mostly. So here I'm in the history department and African American studies. So I think I have to repeat a couple of things I said a couple of weeks ago when we had another event. The main thing that I think, first of all, I need to really thank you all for the work you do. For me, it's been several years of having the opportunity of being educated about what's going on, not only in terms of what happens at Harvard and why we need to act about what happens at Harvard, but also the global significance of what's going on for the future of the planet. So I think at Harvard, what I see is an intolerable contradiction between what we do as educators, which is, I mean, as a university, it's so much committed to diversity and to fight social justice and inequality, and this is what we teach in the classroom. It becomes more and more untenable and unacceptable that the university spends so much of its endowment to cause harm, increase social injustice, compromise the climate, and I think this is something we need to deal with directly and without any subterfuge, without getting away from our responsibilities. So first, I feel conflicted as an educator. I see an incredible contradiction between what I say in the classroom and what the university tells us we need to do as educators, and what it is doing with its endowment in many cases. So we need to bring the things in alliance somehow, align them, so that they are not so contradictory and frankly embarrassing and damaging to the university's reputation. So then what can be done at Harvard? This is, yesterday we had an episode that I want to report to you. The university has its faculty, I mean, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences has a faculty meeting in which all professors are invited to come, and some most major policy issues pertaining to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences are decided in this faculty meeting. Of course, decisions that have nothing to do with money. It's decisions having to do with the academic life of the institution. It's not really where the real power lies, but it's where academic decisions are made. But it's also a space where political issues can be raised, politically in the sense of not only political in the larger sense of what happens out of the university, which also can be addressed in there, but mainly political issues that affect academic life and what we do at the university. So then Professor James is here from the Comparative Literature and English Department, and myself, we one way of bringing awareness of an issue is using a part of the meeting which is called the question period. The question period is open for faculty to bring questions to the administration of the university, and these questions can be sent beforehand. Preferably, this is gives you priority in the way your question is addressed by the meeting. So we drafted together a question that was sent to the office of the secretary that organizes the meeting last Friday. We can do it until 24 hours before the meeting, till noon the day before of the meeting. We sent it well before. We did it on Friday afternoon. I wanted to give them more time to give us to be as fair as possible in terms of knowing in advance what was coming. I'm going to read the question we asked, and then tell you, and Jim is going to help me to convey the answer that we got, which is very disappointing and is still trying to process. So this is last meeting. There was a question about TIA. So the question about investments in farmland for the second time originates a question during one of these faculty meetings for the second time in a row. So this is the question we read yesterday. In our last meeting, a colleague asked a question about TIA farmland investments in Brazil and the ethical questions they raise. The Harvard Management Company has engaged in similar investments, provoking the same dire consequences for the Brazilian Cerrado and its indigenous and Afro-descendant populations. The harmful consequences of HMC investments in Brazil have been reported by several organizations, especially the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights. There have been scholarly articles and a dissertation about them in Brazilian research universities, and the Crimson published a lengthy piece of investigative journalism on the subject in April of this year. At campus, its student organization, Stop Harvard Land Grabs, reached out to the university administration about the subject several times without obtaining a response. The Cerrado is the largest and most diverse tropical savanna in the world. Corporate investment in the area has increased land prices. Fires to clear land have accelerated deforestation and contribute to climate disruption. Corporate investment has caused eviction of traditional peasant communities that for generations had used the land for subsistence agriculture, and also increased violence against these communities by local big bosses interested in land grabs to expand agribusiness. In October 2020, the HMC spun off its natural resources team into a so-called independent management company called Solon Partners. The HMC CEO said on that occasion that Harvard will continue to work closely with Solon Partners as investors and advisors on the management and sale of the university's remaining natural resources assets. What is the current relationship of HMC to Solon Partners? Even if HMC no longer has any land holdings in Brazil, why did it do so in the first place? And what is now going to be done about the harm done by those holdings, whether the holdings were direct or through a shell company or other entity? Will Harvard pledge to investigate or permit an independent body to investigate the serious and documented evidence of harms and damage done by its large acquisition of land in Brazil? Will HMC report with full transparency on its land dealings in Brazil, past and present? So this was the question. It was answered by, let me see her position. She is the Chief Financial Officer and Vice President of Finance. Rede Carle is her name. So she addressed the question of the HMC relations with Solon Partners. First of all, she said that the HMC is not interested in hiding anything. That was the first declaration that she gave, which I thought quite strange, given that we know the attempts to reach out to them that has been done before, and the lack of response. Even the journalists in the Crimson tried to speak with HMC about this, and they did not get a reply. So this professing openness from the beginning, as the first thing that was said in the response was strange to hear. The second thing that I also found strange was that she alleged limited knowledge about the situation because she has only recently been in this role. So again, I mean, the person was not, we're not interested in the knowledge about that person has about the thing. We're asking for an institutional reply. So it's not a question of whether the person knows something or not. We need to hear what the HMC has to say. And so it was, again, very strange to hear that right at the beginning of the response. Now, then the actual response, and then Jim we came with lots of economic jargon that I don't necessarily understand. But she cited at the beginning of this investments in 2008. Basically, she talked about cattle raising, and then $330 million as some numbers that came to me. And in terms of the relationship with Solon partners, my understanding is that Harvard still invests there from the answer that she gave me. She mentioned that they sold in solo in 2021, but HMC is not a majority holder or investor, but it's a limited partner of Solon partners. So my understanding is that she did not really deny that Howard is still very much engaged with this company. She mentioned, yeah, and she kept also saying that she's open to meet with us about the situation. But when she finished, the most shocking thing was that she did not address most of the questions, right? She had asked only the question about the Solon partners, but the question had three parts. The other one was about what Harvard is going to do about the harm that has been done, and also whether Harvard would agree to a full investigation about the harm that was done. And these questions were not addressed. And then Jim, who was at the meeting, immediately raised his hand for a follow-up. And strangely, the way this meeting and the president, the dean, which was leading the meeting, the dean of FAS, was a little confused when he raised his hand, whether she should give the words to him. But then the secretary said, no, we continue with the other questions. And then there was a second question, a third question, and only after these questions and some more conversation, the word went back to Jim. And then Jim asked his question. He's going to say what, he remarked that the questions hadn't been answered. Actually, he summarized what was being asked into very pointed questions, much even more objective than the ones we had before. Does Harvard deny that its former landholders in Brazil and the methods of obtaining these holdings cause harm? If harm was done, second question, how will Harvard rectify or compensate for that harm? So he asked her that questions, and then the word went back to the FAS dean, and then instead of calling the chief financial officer or whatever, who had given the answer to us, she informed that the person had left the meeting. Person had left the meeting because she had another commitment. I don't know how Jim feels about this. I found this truly disrespectful, and it strengthens my resolve to ask this questions again, maybe in this more pointed version that Jim presented at in his intervention, to get an answer. They need to give us an answer, and I think we will continue to ask the question, and I hope the person will be there to answer the question you ask. But Jim was there, and he's much more experienced than I am in terms of how these meetings work, and maybe he can present to us another way of looking at what happened. I was very frustrated and frankly irritated by the way part of the question was totally ignored, and then for the follow-up, the person in charge of answering was not at the meeting. I think this is disrespectful, and I will go back to it for sure next time.
So please, Professor and James Engel, would you like to add something to us? Please.
Well, thank you for letting me say a few words, and I want to thank Sidney for having asked this very articulate question at the meeting yesterday, which was largely unanswered. The indication that we received from the Vice President for Finance, who also sits on the board of the Harvard Management Company, I think that is an important fact to know. So she is sitting on the board of that company. The impression that she gave in her report was initially that a lot of this land, or some of this land, she indicated, had been used for cattle grazing. Whether that is true or not, I do not know. But she said that in an aside about this land, and also indicated that currently Harvard has no direct or indirect interest in farmland in Brazil in terms of ownership. So Harvard Management Company, as you know, is a company that invests very little of the endowment in publicly traded equities, a tiny percentage. And a huge amount of the Harvard endowment is indeed in private equity or in hedge funds. And the reporting on these investments is not transparent at all in any way. So after the faculty meeting a month ago, I had talked with her, and she had said later in a follow-up after that, that she had checked with the Harvard Management Company, and that company currently had no direct or indirect holdings in Brazilian farmland, that they had sold it. She did not deny the history that they had owned it, but she said that they now did not, and that no shell company was involved. That's what she said yesterday also. But it was interesting to learn that the amount of money involved was $330 million, which they can say is a small percentage of the endowment, which is true. The endowment's 50 billion, but 330 million is not at all insignificant. So what was not answered, either from Sidney's question or from my follow-up, it was in essence ignored in his question, was there harm done? And if so, would the university investigate it or agree to an independent investigation, or what would the university do about it? This is a difficult question for any organization to handle because it implies legal liability. If you say that harm was done, that implies that there may be legal liability for the harm. I don't know if we will get an answer. After I asked my quick follow-up, does Harvard deny that harm was done in these land holdings? And if harm was done, will Harvard compensate or make restitution in some form? The university may never wish publicly to answer that question. However, when I was told that Rede Carle had left the meeting, I said that my question needed to be answered at the next faculty meeting. That, in fact, are the rules of faculty procedure. If you ask a question and it cannot or is not answered at that meeting, it must be answered at the next meeting. We shall see what happens. Before the next meeting, which is probably going to be in early December, unless it's canceled, in which case then it will be probably early February, I shall remind the secretary of the faculty about the question that remains on the table. If I am told that it has already been answered, I will say no, it has not, and I will ask that it be answered. At that point, it may go to the parliamentarian of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, who may be asked to decide whether the question was answered or not. But I can say, and I think Sidney will agree, that his question was not at all fully answered, and my questions were clearly not answered. So I have worked for 8 years on fossil fuel divestment at Harvard, which in the end succeeded, at least to a limited degree. There are still fossil fuel investments, probably through hedge funds and through private equity. But I have it in writing from the former president that they are being spun off and released as contracts expire. You must understand that with certain hedge funds and private equity, the investor signs a contract for a certain period of time. And for you to leave that contract imposes a very heavy penalty on you in many cases. So one of the things I want to mention, and then I won't take any more time, is that there is a law in most states, including in Massachusetts, which has some governance over the investments of institutional funds. And I suggest that people involved with the issues here see whether this law is pertinent in thinking about the kinds of investments that Harvard Management Company and even possibly TIAA, but particularly Harvard Management Company has made. The reason for that is that Harvard University is a charitable organization under Massachusetts law. And the law that may be pertinent here, and which a group of people brought to the Attorney General of Massachusetts concerning fossil fuel investments, has a very odd acronym. And it is UPMIFA, awkwardly pronounced UPMIFA. What does this acronym mean? It means the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. And that act sends signals and parameters to institutions about the prudent management of their funds. It is interesting to me that when Harvard said it was no longer going to hold investments in fossil fuel companies, that it explicitly stated it would no longer be prudent to do so. Whether they had some conversation about MIFA or not, I do not know. But that is one possible legal strategy to investigate. I don't think it would apply to TIAA, which is not a charity. It's fundamentally an insurance and an annuity company, however much it provides for people in the educational area. Sidney and I will continue to ask the question that was not answered. And we hope that we get a fuller answer. But I feel that since it is a delicate and a pointed question about harm, that we may not. And having dealt with Harvard Management Company and Harvard on other issues over the years, I think that it's possible that we will not get an answer that is direct. But we will not let go of the question and hope, we will hope for an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor and professors, for your words and efforts, and the information you bring is very important for our work campaigns and in coalition too. This is the end of the presentations with the panelists. Thank you very much. Now the idea is for us to have a round of questions and answers. As if Joshua could, if you can have Zoom back here, you can, the ones online can send us questions. And the ones also present here can make questions. So it's open for that now.
Follow-up with Jim?
Sorry?
Did I have a follow-up with Jim quickly?
Yes, of course.
Jim,
Please.
I wonder if we can, I don't know how much we are gonna get an answer about the harm cost. But I see what happened in Brazil and the Cerrado and so on. As an educational opportunity for the university. I think the university should be interested in knowledge about what happened. Right? So for example, if there is, without even making the judgment about whether harm was done or not, since there is evidence and allegations about harm and so on, and since this has to do with climate change, which is so much emphasized by the university should be interested in putting together an investigation, hiring researchers, and invest some money, which will be a fraction of what they made with this investment, to go there and to talk to experts, to do research, have a research team, and find out something that can also inform not only what HMC does going forward, but also other institutions that are still investing in this. So I think we can try to push for that part of this.
I agree completely. It would make a wonderful case for the business in sustainable or not sustainable investing. A lot could be learned from it. It is possible that after a period of time, the Harvard Management Company saw that their investment was not good and that they wished to be out of it, and they got out. But
They're not good beyond the capital that they didn't make.
Yeah.
They're not good because of other things.
for various reasons, yes. But I think, you know, as was said earlier in the seminar, the power of investing very large sums of money now as applications to environmental and social issues of all kinds. And it's increasingly incumbent upon companies to pay attention to that, including on climate issues. The Securities and Exchange Commission has not yet issued its rules for ESG investing. They've been dragging their feet on it for almost 2 years. It would be nice if they adopted EU principles or California principles, but it's unclear what they will do. But I agree, Sidney. This could be a learning experience, and it could change attitudes. We'll see what happens.
Just one quick thing. A few years ago, when Altamiran, who is a community member from Brazil who works in that region, and he was here, they refused to meet with him. So another ask would be, would you be able or open to meet with representatives of affected communities? So this should be a simple ask, right? So they refused before. They're not even open to meet with students, Harvard students, but this should not be a difficult answer. We hope. So
I understand. I've had 2 meetings with representatives of the Harvard Management Company. They took a long time to set up. It is not easy to establish these meetings. But you're right, a simple request would seem in order.
Thank you so much.
So any questions for us? Please, Joshua, please, do we have questions online?
No.
No, okay, not yet, so my chat. No. Just two reminders, we have at the end of the event, we have lunch and there is coffee and water, so help yourself. And some of the reports we mentioned here, you can also take it with you. So please go ahead, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Aragolasti, a security guard at Harvard for the last 30 years. And for many years, I've been involved with groups that were dedicated to improving or eliminating problematic investment policies of our management company. I've been so much involved with TIAA, but I've tried to keep up with what TIAA divest is doing and so forth. So I was a member of Responsible Investment at Harvard, and now defunct group. And when it was founded, we did a lot of research on holdings around the world. We were contacted by groups from various countries. We didn't so much so have connections at the time with what was going on in Brazil, but we're aware of a number of companies down there. And of the links to which Harvard, the interesting thing is that Harvard was a pioneer amongst endowments and getting involved in land holdings in general. And you know, really there were some forest lands up in Maine, large tracts of those. And then, as people have mentioned, after the financial crisis, there was a bigger focus on other parts of the world. And they assigned some Harvard management company managers to these decisions about acquisitions and functionality. Both of them from South America. We had a lot of connectivity with people down there, and they assigned some of those people with whom they had personal connections to manage operations. So these were people where, for instance, in Brazil, they set up either majority owned or largely owned entities, a number of which were headquartered legally in the Cayman Islands. So there's an indication right there to minimize transparency. And it was all second parties handling direct activities on the ground. So we had a lot of connection to communities and activists, a couple of whom were shown on the screen there earlier. We raised funds to bring to Harvard's campus to testify about what was going on down there. We had 2 students who went to Argentina repeatedly, spent time in the communities and did research down there. And no question that in Argentina, it's a wetland area. And timberland, monoculture timberland was being set up in a way that affected groundwater quality and availability to local communities. And so there was no question harm was being done. I think likewise in Brazil, Rede, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I think I've even seen maps of Harvard holdings down there showing, for instance, where large-scale wildfires took place, where one can pretty well presume that those occurred because it was a surreptitious land clearing effort. And whether it was cattle ranching or it was for soy production, there's been enough testimonies from people down there, so there's no question that harms were done. In other parts of the world, we had the timberland holdings also in Chile. We had a grad student member from the Kennedy School who was from Chile. He went back down there and did investigations. Again, no question that harm was done. So I think one could put together a very good case independently of whatever they're willing to volunteer on the subject, that this is the deal. So then the question is, how, we have precedent for Harvard investigating harms of the past, although the more distant past, with the slavery investigation, and with acknowledgement and a decision that steps should be taken, not to rectify, to at least address in a compensatory way of some kind the harms that had been done. So that, for it to be Harvard Management Company per se, is a question, or TIA, you have issues of fiduciary responsibility that are going to come up, where if there's a demand for them to unload properties entirely, at the least, I think those fiduciary responsibility questions will come into play, and so that will have to be part of any conversations and negotiations on the subject. But
there was an investigation that more recently too of the Jeffrey Epstein and his involvement with Harvard. That was a very recent investigation about relatively recent activity at Harvard, and that was made public.
Yeah, where it was very much so acknowledged that harms were done, and in fact, there are a lot of people in high positions who knew fully well what was going on. We met with a woman who's been in charge of due diligence and whatnot for Harvard Management Company, and who was assistant. And we had those Argentina representatives at the meeting to discuss all this stuff, and incredibly, and also the vice president for sustainability from Harvard Management Company was there at the meeting, and they had just sent her down to Argentina so she could be ushered around by the local management and be able to come back and make claims about everything being marvelous. But fortunately, we had not only students, but the local community representatives who had the real story from their own direct experience. So we did a lot of, the research was easier to do back then, because with these wholly owned entities, they had to be declared in Harvard's annual tax filings. So you could see worldwide just an absolutely phenomenal roster of such companies, and that would be an avenue to pursue additional information, but also provide confirmation, and it would show things such as I believe that's where we were able to see the extent to which registrations were done in the Cayman Islands, for tax purposes, and also because there's no ability to investigate what's going on there. I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't know, I haven't looked at the tax filings for a long time, so I'm not sure to what extent there still are certain wholly owned entities separately from land holdings, maybe, that might still be, it was something that was never addressed by Harvard in terms of why exactly would we have all of these companies that belong to our endowment that are based in the Cayman Islands, where there's been a lot of controversy and exposés around the world about the shenanigans that go on with exactly such companies headquartered there for concealment of what the public, they would rather the public not be aware of. So, yeah, and as people may know, amazingly, the guy who's now in charge of Solon is also the very same guy who was in charge of Radar back when Harvard owned these properties in Brazil, who then was brought to handle Harvard's natural resources investments for Harvard Management Company, and continued in that role up until he set up his own independent operation, and they put in stakeholder funding of, if I remember correctly, something like $500 million for him to just, do as he saw fit. And I'm sure there was consultation about let's sell the major holdings available. There were, between him, his name's Colin Butterfield, and he did a presentation at one point at the business school where he was questioned. It might have been me that brought up the question about there were, reports from Brazil, but also a big expose in the New York Times detailing all of the nonsense going on, and detailing the extent to which purchases have been done by land grabbers, including this one guy who apparently he's passed away now,
The Carle.
Euclides the Carle.
Yeah, who, you know, in order to obtain properties, he actually brought in armed persons to coerce people off of their properties. And, you know, there's just no question about it. And then on top of it, you got the rampant corruption going on with not only the judges, the more recent revelation, but you know, the local clerks that handle company property transactions and so forth. So, you know, when you're getting into land holdings in a place like Brazil, it's inevitable unless you do incredible due diligence and you're going to be incredibly selective about your purchases, that it's so endemic. The crime and corruption and coercion and so forth, it's going to be extremely difficult to avoid. So, you know, you don't want to have a scenario where you have independent operators down there on the ground to whom, you know, whose activities nobody is paying any kind of close attention to, because it got to the point where the empire around the world was so vast, and all these companies had their independent managers in Europe. Well, it was an instance of husband and wife independent manager who were taking payoffs in order to sell properties to Harvard for a much higher price than in fact they were worth. Until finally that was exposed, these people were arrested, and Harvard decided to sell all of its properties in the country. So the fact is, Harvard Management Company, they didn't have a clue about a lot of what was going on, because they just weren't doing what the responsible thing is to do. Only after Colin Butterfield came along did they begin to send him around to in person investigate what the hell is happening. And he was shocked, even despite all his involvement previously in Brazil. So there were emails which came to light later on, back and forth about, you know, and at the time, yeah, I was trying to figure out, having had the brief interaction with him in the business school, you know, I corresponded with him a little bit, you know, so I was trying to get an idea of, there were also emails that were put out about the tremendous financial losses down there, where the story was, it was just an absolute disaster. I think the goal to begin with was to purchase these properties, have, you know, a certain amount of whatever going on there, but have the presumption that land values are going to increase over time, just hold them for a certain amount of time and then sell them for a nice profit. And it didn't work out that way, although, you know, if they've been able to last them now, apparently land values are going up more so because there's so much demand from all of these big investors. But I won't go on terribly much longer. I just was going to bring up the question, rather than pontificating, about, is it not the case that a very large percentage of agricultural land worldwide is operating at a large scale, and you know, and much of it is owned by large investors? I've read that Bill Gates is the largest agricultural landowner in the United States, and that given the demands of civilization, it's likely they're going to be continuing to, you know, huge demands for the various products which are mostly grown now in monocultures, no matter what anybody does. So that to some extent, you know, these kinds of operations and these kinds of investments, whether it's endowments doing them or whatever, are inevitable. Would it not be worthwhile to attempt something such as has been done for fossil fuels? There's a project from out of Stanford called the Solutions Project, where analyses have been done for every country of the world, how renewable energy could be provided to substitute for fossil fuels, going into all the necessary detail with that. So, you know, if the presumption is that to some extent, I mean, we want to address the problem globally, the impacts of large-scale agriculture with its pesticides and its, you know, societal impacts, and its and the extent to which it's disconnecting local people from their agency and their history and, you know, their own necessity to take from the land and so forth. Could it not be possible to come up with proposals that would show how can foodstuffs and agricultural operations be operated in such a way that in fact it doesn't do this damage and it's supportive of local communities and it's restorative of the land? I just read an article about,
So please, we have more questions.
yeah, okay, well, it's just, I'd be very interested to know, because, you know, whether on large scale, it in fact might be possible to do things restoratively, and there should be advocacy for that.
Thank you.
Sure.
So the
Yeah,
first one,
Emilio. Yeah. Emilio is actually one of the organizers I think you were mentioning, working with in Argentina
Yeah,
about
yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah,
So I'd love to hear this.
you can talk, you. Josh, please muted. His mic. You have to unmute, everyone.
I can't. I can ask him to unmute, but
So I can.
There, yeah.
Hi everyone.
No.
Hi, my name is Emilio. I'm from Argentina. I live in the north of Argentina in Corrientes. Thank you for this meeting. I will be very happy with us, and I will be my question in Spanish. Is okay?
Yes, you can try to translate.
Sí.
Well,
Bueno,
really,
nosotros hemos denunciado
so we have denounced the destruction of the wetlands by Harvard in the last 10 years, and unfortunately, the Harvard Management Company sold all their lands in Corrientes last year without us managing to make them recognize the damage they caused. If we manage to make them improve the conditions for the workers in other participatory processes, after the announcement we had against Harvard and its sub companies. But after all these years, when we have been going along what has been happening in Chile, also by where Harvard Management Company lost a trial, but by destruction of a native forest and the Chile forest, where the damage was proved by the Chilean law. It also, and they just did the whole process of land grabbing overall. So we were part of that follow-up of that investigation. We found out that the Harvard had more than 100 companies working for them in Latin America. So the recurring question all these years has been, what is the demand that we can give the Harvard authorities so that they can be committed to the social and environmental damages that they are causing, and where their response is not just to sell the lands and leave without resolving anything. So what is the mechanism that we could create so Harvard doesn't dislodge itself of these companies as soon as they get into legal trouble? Here in Corrientes, we still discover new impacts of the damage that was created in the environment in Harvard. But as I said, Harvard is no longer the owner. We don't have a legal way in Argentina to reclaim, to denounce what they had done in the past. So the environmental damages are fast, but it takes decades to come to a resolution. So we need to find a way to make Harvard responsible for this, because after every campaign, the same thing happens. It's very costly for local communities to participate. And when we manage to set up a good number of the outreach about the conflict, about the issue, Harvard just packs up their bags and leaves. So it's important to create a answer based on that recurring issue.
Thank you, Emilio. We have 3 more questions in the chat. I will read them, and I think all the questions are related, then make a round of answers, okay? They are very much related. Todd Lee says perhaps divestment of farmland by institutional investors should be made to only family farmers, perhaps facilitated by organizations that advocate for family farmers in the various countries. Divestment to large mega or corporate farms solves only a part of the problem, to the extent of some removing institutional investment only to transfer land to large land holding entities. Catherine E., thank you for the important work you are all engaged in. I am wondering what kind of efforts are happening in the US and elsewhere to pass laws to adopt policies preventing the sale of lands to land grabbing entities. The Santa Barbara County example was a good one, but I'm wondering to what extent other jurisdictions are aware enough to prevent such sales. In other words, if efforts like those described today are ultimately successful and Harvard and other institutions stop their land grabbing practices and divest from such holdings, what's to prevent other actors, Saudi Arabia, etc., from continuing to buy up and profit from land and water resources? As we consider the issue of naming and addressing harm, might we also reflect again on the received understanding of investments as extraction? What should Harvard invest in? How can investments support peasant communities, small family-sized farmers, and agriculture that cares for land communities and the environment? I think Antonio, he had something there. No? In the US, some states, particularly in the Midwest, have laws to prevent land grabbing by corporations, including financial institutions. These laws served as models for the farmland for farmers. So should we follow the same order? That
make a concluding remark. That's right. Some of the questions,
please.
Yeah. So yeah, no, with what Antonio's written there, I think that's really important. And just, whatever level of government recognizing that there is this predatory finance out there that's seeking to buy up farmland and all kinds of other things, and there need to be laws in place to protect public goods, protect farmland, protect rural communities from these actors. I'd say, listening to everything, I think one thing that's really important to understand is that, Harvard has a $50 billion endowment. It's a huge amount of money, and clearly has nowhere near the amount of due diligence in place or kind of governing bodies in place that could actually ensure that might be invested sustainably, whatever that means. And, they have a majority of their funds, as Professor was saying, in hedge funds and private equity funds that are even more at a distance, and there's even more opacity in these investments. So trying to have some kind of accountability here is going to be extremely complicated, as long as the endowment is run on a basis of maximizing returns. So Harvard is just acting to, the endowment will always say this: we're just trying to maximize our returns. That's our mandate. That's our fiduciary responsibility. So as long as that is still there, I would say it's impossible really to imagine that you're going to have an endowment fund that would have the level of due diligence and the type of investment strategy that could actually be seen as something sustainable. I mean, it's a great question. Could they invest in, in small scale peasant agriculture? Okay, but that's going to require a lot of structure, a lot of work, a lot of additional costs. It might not provide the kind of returns. It wouldn't provide the kind of returns that the endowment is seeking. So the realistic question is you have to challenge. I think this is what Sidney was pointing to. You know, there is this untenable contradiction that exists with university endowments, and exists also with pension funds. I mean, the same thing can be said where workers' retirement savings are now being used to fund all kinds of things that are anti-worker. You know, it's not just when it comes to rural labor here in the cases we've highlighted, but you know, when it comes to nursing homes, when it comes to the utilities, when it comes to all kinds of areas of our lives, increasing areas of our lives, where these pension funds, these endowments are the oxygen that is driving this kind of predatory capitalism that we're seeing right now. So really we have to, and I think it's important, when it's asking the endowment to be responsible in its investing, think, well, what is that going to look like for an endowment to actually be responsible? One that manages $50 billion, you know, which is, I think, outrageous, but still, you know, manages $50 billion. What can that really look like? And I think that the fiduciary responsibility that has long been the justification for these horrid investments should be the thing that really needs to be tackled.
Thanks, Maria Luisa, please.
Yes, I think that we need to make a difference between the production of agricultural commodities that are mainly produced in the southern countries for export, the colonial plantation system that are also a way of generating speculative investments in commodity markets. So we're not talking about the production of food. In the case of Brazil, agribusiness mainly produces for commodities, soy, sugar, beef, and timber. And the indigenous movements are actually calling for a boycott of these four commodities. And the studies we have done show that agribusiness is only viable in Brazil, it's only profitable because you receive billions of dollars in subsidies. So, you know, small farmers who produce food for local markets, in addition to, having developed sustainable practices in agriculture, it's also in terms of economic development, it could be a much more interesting investment in terms of, if we're talking about producing food for local markets, that generates local development for the local economy. So I think that those types of the land grabbing agribusiness system could be profitable in the short term, but in the medium long term, it generates debt, financial debt, and environmental debt. So I think we need to, shift also the discourse about, this is not necessarily generating profits. And also, I think, of course, if Harvard agrees to divest from farmlands and compensate impacted communities, of course, we are not solving all the problems in the world, but I think it will be an important precedent because of the role that the university has and its name and recognition. So I think, we need to work one step at a time. And I think that if Harvard sets the example, that it's still a very important result. We should not think that we're going to solve all the problems in the world, but this could be a very important step towards dealing with transforming our food system.
Tristan, please.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. They're really fantastic. I think the first one I'll tackle is this transition to agroecology. And I don't know if I didn't define agroecology, but it is ecological agriculture, but it's more than that. And it's not just about agriculture without pesticides or without monocropping. it is that. It's also got a social dimension, a political dimension, but it's also kind of a way of organizing food systems. So there's a ton of work happening all around the world on agroecology. It's being debated at the United Nations. There's a lot of work to advance it. In the United States, our discourse around agriculture is very primitive, or we're very far away from even being able to talk about agroecology. We're still trying to fight for organic, which is a sort of limited version of that, and trying to, we still have to argue about whether organic can feed the world or something. It absolutely can. To your point, Art, I think the ETC group out of Canada estimates that agribusiness controls 70% of the land, but produces maybe 30% of the food, whereas small scale farmers control 30% of the land, but produce 70% of the food, because agribusiness is producing commodities. They're not producing, it's not producing food. Some of it does end up on our plates, but the vast majority is just raw material. I mean, in fact, they talk about this term flex crops. You can produce soybeans or corn that can be fuel, it can be, a food additive, it can be clothing, or it can be fiber, it can be animal feed, something like this. Corn can even be turned into plastic. So I think there is a lot of work already being done around there, but we need to really bring up our own debate around agriculture in the United States, and it's very difficult because of how strong the agribusiness monopoly is on the media and on the way we talk about food and everything and land. Regarding how to facilitate divestment of these land holdings so that farmers and communities benefit, it's a hugely important question. When you're dealing with actually holding on to the land, how do you transfer ownership in a way that creates change rather than just Harvard selling it to some other private equity fund? That's not what we want. I'll just say that one organization out in Oregon, the Coast Range Association, has been doing a lot of thinking about for a long time what to do about industrial timber out there, and how the intensive logging is not only bad for communities, bad for the workers, bad for the environment, but trees are one of the only ways to sequester carbon, or one of the only good ways to sequester carbon. And they're just not going to be able to log as much. And if these financial companies, corporations are owning the timber, they have sometimes a legal requirement to squeeze as much money from the land as possible. So they're proposing a land reform. The federal government would pay, market value potentially to the companies for the land, and then they would give it as a land trust to the community to manage responsibly, and maybe be funded through some, conservation easement or something or other to recognize the carbon sequestration benefits. That's just one idea. I don't think that I'm not endorsing that idea, but there are mechanisms, there are legal structures that we could easily do to make this happen. It would take a lot of work. We have to build a lot of awareness and understanding, because it can go sideways very quickly, but it can be done. Regarding policies, yes, as Antonio mentioned, a lot of Midwestern states passed these anti-corporate farming laws about 100 years ago, when there was a lot of populist activity in the farm sector. A lot of these laws, they still are very effective, but the situation has changed a little bit with different financial mechanisms. They don't stop wealthy individuals from owning a ton of land. There's also some states that don't have them. So, example, Iowa does have an anti-corporate farming law, but Illinois right next to it does not. So there's still a lot of corporations that can move into Illinois, and maybe they just displace some of the wealthy individuals who go into Iowa. There is, at the federal level, there is a Foreign Ownership of Farmland Disclosure Act. So if you are a foreign entity buying farmland, or if you're a U.S. entity using foreign money, you are supposed to disclose that to the federal government. I think it's been somewhat of a weak regulation, so there's efforts to ramp it up, make it stronger. As I mentioned, the Farmland, as Antonio mentioned as well, the Farmland for Farmers Act from Senator Cory Booker would be quite significant. But another issue is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture doesn't even track financial company ownership of farmland yet. They do track absentee owner, or they call it non-operator landlords, but it's not clear. Sometimes that's just someone who's inherited the land and they rent it out to somebody. They don't really distinguish yet. So we need to get them to track this so that we can even understand what's going on. The question of investment versus extraction, that is key to this. So I think all of these things, we use the word investment, but they are very clearly extractive. They are not investing anything to make something better. And there's certainly a way to do investment in agriculture, a way to do investment in agroecology, but it is not through real estate speculation of land. In fact, TIAA, they call it separating farming from its capital base. You know, this is not investing in agriculture. They very clearly are engaging in real estate speculation, which is extractive. But the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis a few years ago did put out a report, 300-page report. I admit I have not read it. I've skimmed it. It's quite large, but they have 15 different articles from very good academics and practitioners about what investment would actually look like. It's in like local processing infrastructure. It's in which doesn't exist anymore. It's all gone away with consolidation. So it's about bringing local food systems back. That's where the investment's going to be, but they're not going to get the kinds of return that they're promising right now. So the whole model is going to have to change. The whole model is predicated on extracting as much as possible. It's got to actually be an investing model and investing in what we want. And that leads to this bigger question about what's happening with the retirement sector, with the pension sector, because it's the biggest financial sector. It's the biggest mass of money in the financial sector, I believe. $40 trillion, I think. 51 trillion. And I think many folks are aware, human civilization needs to undergo a massive transformation to get to stop emitting carbon and to live in a different way with nature. And we need to be funding big transitions. And they have this pot of $51 trillion that perversely, there are regulations to protect people's retirements, and so you have to invest in conservative things. You can't be taking wild risks with people's retirement money. But that ultimately means you have to just put it back into the same kind of unsustainable, destructive system. So there has to be a change there as well regarding what's going to happen with this money. And I know there's been proposals, during the New Deal era, there was a federal authority that took control of private finance and said, we need investments in workforce. We need investments here. We need like real investments. The private sector wouldn't make those investments on their own because there's no guarantee. They're too risky. Federal government says, we're going to use this money. We're going to put it to work, doing things that people actually need. If this investment goes sideways, the federal government can step in and make you whole a little bit, but you'll also get, if it goes well, you'll get a cut. And it's a way of taking this private finance, which could do a lot of good, but it's being run by people who really don't care and don't have the expertise. I do not trust any of these people giving money to small scale farmers to do agroecology. It would be a disaster. But if we had a USDA, a US Department of Agriculture, that was committed to agroecology and that could partner with Treasury Department that could channel this private sector funding and put it to places where it needs to go, that's what we need to do, but there's a lot of steps it's going to take to get there. But this is the first step, is by saying this kind of investment this kind of financial activity is not what we need and not what we want.
Thank you, Tristan. Rachel, please.
Yeah, very briefly, I'll just say two things. The first, what was coming up for me in these last few questions is about what it means to lead responsibly, which I think is critical, and I'm so glad that it was raised. I think besides perhaps like a revolution, fundamental change in our economic systems, I think there is an invitation from Emilio that I hope we can hear as a call to action of what does it look like this year? What does it look like right now to show up for organizers in Argentina who are figuring out what reparations look like, what responsible leaving looks like for Harvard's investments in Argentina. And so I think those relationships with frontline communities are critical, and I hope we can orient towards that this year. The second thing I want to say to Annie Laurie's question around what does it look like? What should Harvard invest in? You are all warmly invited to a community dinner this evening, where I hope we can kind of shift into that kind of a conversation, besides just enjoying each other's company and delicious food, to dream a little bit together about what endowment justice looks like, what land justice looks like, and to continue that conversation. So if you haven't received information about the community dinner, find me or Hannah or Kayla, and we'll make sure you have the information you need.
Thank you, Professor Sidney. Please.
Well, I want to address specifically the questions of the some of the observations about the endowment that have already been made. My observation addresses that. I think we live a very strange situation at the university, which is, of course, it's always been like that, but it's not natural that it's that way. It was constructed this way, which is that you have this very sharp separation between the corporation and the Harvard Management Company and the actual enterprise the university is about, which is education, which is production of knowledge, which is what faculty and students and staff do to make this place what it is. And the people who actually make this place what it is have no power in that structure, right? I mean, the HMC and the corporation decide what to do. We have to accept that you're beneficiaries of this because the way they run the endowment gives us money to do what we do. And now we're left this contradiction because I'd be happy to have a lot less money and much more accountability, right? And they should be accountable to us, to the faculty, to the students, to the staff, to those who make Harvard what Harvard is. So I committed to the institution. And at this point, being committed to the institution, being committed to its mission, means to question and to ask for accountability from the HMC, from the corporation. And this power structure is not good governance. It's actually a way of making unaccountability, a way of running the place. And this is, well, this is completely, I feel ridiculous saying this because of course it's a losing battle, but it must be said aloud, right? It's not a way to run an institution like this in order to promote human good, which is what we are committed to do.
Thank you very much.